Let me just quickly preface this video by saying that there are a lot of ways to train a focused response, and this is just one of them. So a focused response is a type of alert where the dog works all the way to the source of the odour, pauses with his nose there, and doesn't leave until we release him. I prefer it over other responses simply because of its accuracy and obviousness. So you'll need 4 things for this to work: a marker or clicker, paired inaccessible odour, reward orientation, and leash tension. These may not make sense just yet, but by the end of the video it will, I promise. You'll need these 4 things regardless of your setup. So I use a training hub with drawers and cardboard boxes, but the process will work in other setups too, like scent walls and PVC pipes and that kind of thing. So a marker or clicker is used to pinpoint the exact behaviour you're wanting to capture. We use shaping here, so capture any approximation towards that final response behaviour. This starts out as just sourcing the odour, then pausing very briefly there, then pausing for a little longer, etc., etc. The paired inaccessible odour. So this does several things to manipulate the search area so as to induce the dog to do the things we want. Firstly, it draws them into the correct box. Secondly, it provides incentive for them to fight leash tension to stay at the correct box, which will make more sense in a little bit. And thirdly, it gives them a reason to keep returning to that odour box. Reward orientation. So I use a regular forward chain method for this, which means that the dog always has to search right from the first session before they source odour. This would mean if we were paying away from source, that the dog would only be able to source odour once for every search. This is needlessly time consuming and doesn't give us the reps we need to build that response in a timely fashion. So we pay at source. And by doing so, the dog's able to return again and again. And this gives us anywhere from like 1 to 10 or more reps to reinforce the response for every one search. And leash tension. This is a tricky thing to talk about, but bear with me. So for a lot of dogs, leash tension is absolutely essential to creating the focused response. It triggers both their opposition reflex and also an anticipatory response, which we'll talk about more once we get into the meat of this process, which we'll do now. So we begin shaping the response after we've had a brief session of self-rewarding in the training area. This induces them to search the area where they'll hopefully run into our paired odour box. So step 1, the dog must work to the highest concentration of odour and return there after each mark and reward. Sounds simple, and for some dogs it is. Think of the box with like a button. And every time the dog pushes the button with his nose, you mark and reward at or in the vicinity of source. So most dogs, once they realise that they can't access whatever's in the box and you are paying them, they'll start to look at you and offer all kinds of behaviours that we really don't want in this context. So you can either just let them figure it out by themselves or you can help them back. This often looks really super messy, but it's short. Anyone with free shaping experience kind of knows that the road to the end can be hard to watch sometimes. Anyway, so step 2 is to introduce leash tension. So initially we just pull on the leash to varying intensities, depending on the dog in front of us, obviously. And immediately let the leash go slack, mark, and reward. We do this for about 10 returns to source, solely to show the dog that the leash is relevant in the reward sequence. We're almost charging the leash like we would a clicker. And I should say as well that for quite some time, we always mark the dog for simply sourcing odour, and it's only on those returns that we start asking for the pause. Step 3 is to induce a pause with the leash. So we have the dog reliably returning to the box after each mark and reward, and he understands the leash is somehow relevant. Now to induce a pause with it. To do so, add tension when the dog returns to the box, and if they pull their head back, let the leash go slack and wait. They should return, at which point you repeat the tension. There may be some back and forth for a bit, but eventually they should fight against the tension, at which point you mark, let the tension go slack and reward. Wash, rinse, and repeat. There is a balance to this that can be a bit delicate with some dogs. We want to keep rewarding the dog for simply returning to source so that they don't lose enthusiasm for the game, but we also want to be able to build that pause. You may find that for every 10 returns to source, you're only getting a pause on one of those, and that's okay, as long as you don't miss an opportunity to capture that pause and just keep trying. Step 4, build duration. So once the dog is reliably freezing with the leash tension, we can start building duration in very small increments. This is when people ask me, how long is long enough? And the answer is different for everyone. But once you reach that 3-second mark, it's pretty easy to continue to build on it until the dog will freeze for like a minute or more, say. Step 5, fade the leash tension. So we really don't want to come to rely on the leash for any longer than we have to, as it can become a real crutch. That's not to say that we won't ever use it again. It's going to be very useful for things like, movable hides, boxes, when we start generalizing the response on different training aids, that sort of thing. So when you do this, you will have to reduce your response criteria. So if you were getting a 10-second freeze, you'll only be waiting for like 1, 2, 3 seconds, something like that. And it gets built back up really quick, so this is only temporary. And step 6 is to get that response on the first encounter, because that's the one that matters. Up until now, you should have been marking and rewarding your dog for simply sourcing odor, but now we're changing things up and we're going to ask for them to respond when they first work to source. So again, lower your response criteria for a few searches. You'll find it valuable to intermittently mark on the find, which is something I discuss in another video. And from that point, it's just a matter of generalizing the response on other training aids. And again, that may require you to lower your response criteria. You may even need to use leash tension a few times too. But yes, that is in a nutshell how to train the focused response. So I hope this video has helped you in your Nosework journey. The concept of training a focused response is covered in more depth in my upcoming book. But please feel free to ask me questions in the meantime. Happy sniffing!